Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the AAUW branch meeting. That is the Donna Randolph Art Program tonight. AAUW is an organization that many of you have supported all year. This is our last regular meeting for our year of 21-22. And our last meeting of the year is a scholarship meeting and a dinner, which we will send some invitations out related to. But for our regular program meeting, tonight is that night. As most of you know who've been coming, AAUW is an organization that advances gender equity for women and girls through reason, education, and advocacy. And it's kind of interesting. Reason, meaning we are able to use our brains in terms of how we are approaching things to make sure that we achieve equity for women and girls. And tonight we have a very special treat in that we are devoting a wonderful part of our brain to art things. So for the beginning of the program here, I have invited Sarah Faye Martin to talk to us about our program, why it's named as it is, and what that all means to us. So, Sarah Faye, if you will come forth, thank you.
Thank you, and welcome this evening. Yes, we are going to talk about art. Donna Randolph was a member of our AAUW group, and for years wanted to make sure that young people had the opportunity to learn what is out there in the world. And I say that in a very wide open space. Originally, the AAUW program, our branch in Carbondale, started with an essay program. Young people were asked to write an essay, and they were judged upon this essay with prizes, I believe, that were money. And through the years, it revolved and evolved into an art program, which Donna thought very thoroughly about this. She personally went to every school that she could find in this territory that had children in this young age of it. Now today it is a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. It would be a middle school, junior high age level. And to talk about young women and to show a theme based from art. So today we've run into the problem of COVID, and schools have really closed their doors to outside exercise. So because of this, we are waiting for them to open again. And we are going to provide you with a wonderful speaker today who is going to tell us about her art. And in the hopes in the future, our own children will be able to come back and provide art also, and have a speaker that will give them another education. Thank you.
Oh, just a second. So Martha Ellert, we've asked to introduce our speaker. So Martha, would you please give Lavinia? You're muted yet.
Yeah, I had to find where to unmute it. So, okay. Okay. Am I, can everyone hear me now? Thank you. Yes, it is just a delight to introduce Lavinia Roberts, our speaker. When Lavinia applied for an AAUW graduate scholarship last year, she described herself right off the bat as an award-winning playwright and evaluator and educator. And she certainly, in her letter, it was quite clear that she certainly was that. And it seemed to me, just seeing that when she had graduated with her undergraduate and what she was doing in the meantime, she would be an excellent candidate for our Joyce Kelly Award, which is for a non-traditional student. So I asked her to just kind of take us on the journey of how did she get from her Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Kansas in 2008 to being in the Master of Fine Arts program in playwriting at SIU. So, and it was a very interesting story. she mentions that the first thing she did when she graduated was she worked as a teaching artist at the Topeka Civic Center and Academy. She had the opportunity to facilitate classes and direct large cast productions with K through 12 students. So right off the bat, she was working with art in the schools. She wanted to grow as a theater practitioner and educator. So of course she moved to New York City in 2011. And there she worked as a teaching artist. She was teaching puppetry, theater, and visual art. She worked predominantly in public schools with ESL learners, so she was teaching English as a second language through puppetry and theater. She worked in every borough in the city with students from all over the world. She worked in schools that did not have arts education programming. She also worked at Trinity Church Wall Street in the education department as a teaching artist, and she and her sister created giant nativity backpack puppets for Trinity Wall Street, which are now part of the church's annual Christmas tradition. During her time in New York City, her work was produced in a variety of spaces and with many creative people. And time does not permit me to tell you all, but there were many. In 2015, she wanted to expand as a teaching artist and theater maker. She used her savings to go to Southeast Asia for 6 months, of course, because that's what one would do. And she did. She did artist residencies and facilitated young artists in the Philippines and in Thailand. She traveled by herself to Cambodia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Singapore to study dance, puppetry, and theater in those countries. But she really appreciated the creative community that she had in New York City. She wanted to be closer to her family in Lawrence, Kansas. She wanted the opportunity to visit other creative communities. So she did a series of artist residencies in other cities around the country in 2018 to 2020. And that included many states and many different places. She described herself largely self-taught as a writer, and she wanted the opportunity to really hone in on her craft and formally study playwriting. So she had facilitated university-age students when she was a visiting artist during her residencies, and she found teaching at the college level to be engaging and worth pursuing. So she applied to graduate schools and began attending Southern Illinois University in 2019. We are so fortunate to have her as our speaker this evening, and I will now turn it over to Lavinia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me here this evening to share my creative practice with you. And thank you for your support of me and my work as a scholar and as a creative. So I'm gonna share my screen. So a little bit about myself. I'm a facilitator, I'm a playwright, I'm a visual artist, and I appreciate doing work in non-traditional spaces. And so these are some of the productions I worked on in New York. And theater is very collaborative. So I'm working with a lot of folks. And a theater company I worked with was Exquisite Corpse Company. And they do these site-specific productions. And one of them was in a house on Governor's Island. I was part of a production called Novel Spaces, which brings novels to life through installations. And there's a photo of me from an installation about the Grapes of Wrath. I also worked in a production that was in a hotel. There were different surrealist installations in the different productions. So I appreciate the opportunity to create work in different spaces, working with a variety of folks. So this is from a performance piece I did called Treasures. And it's this post-apocalyptic play, sort of this creature who's remembering nature when it existed. And so I created a variety of puppets from found materials for this piece. Uh, and I originally came up with this as part of the cave at Frontrunner Gallery, and it was the present preserved. So why did people draw and paint on cave walls? And if the present were to be preserved now on cave walls, what would it look like? So I was part of this collective that, created this installation and created that performance there. So here are more pictures from that. And this is from a production of Odyssey, and I was a writer for this, and I also created masks. And it was a reimagining of the Odyssey and exploring the role of women after men have come back from war and have, those experiences, and then rehumanizing them after having been part of combat. And it was an installation that took place in an old hospital space. And there were different rooms in the different hospitals, and these were the different islands. And there were 2 different Ulysses that you could follow in the production. So here's some more photos from that production of a different room in the space. And so the audience would follow a different Ulysses around the hospital. So here's more photos from that. So themes that I'm interested in exploring: feminism, social justice, stewardship of the environment. I'm interested in fantasy and speculative fiction as a way to reimagine our world. I'm also interested in historical characters in plays. While at SIU, I've written 3 plays inspired from history. My first year play was about Louisa May Alcott and her time as a nurse during the Civil War. And my thesis play, which just happened in February, was based off a historical event where Agatha Christie, I don't know how many of you are Agatha Christie fans, she disappeared. And so the play explores that. So I also appreciate exploring working class and women's history and using the past to discuss and understand the present. So this is from another production called The Dead Moon, which incorporated movement and video. And it was I think 6 different female playwrights, and we were given the brief of write a fairy tale. And so it was an evening of short pieces. This is from my play Eaten Voices, which again is sort of a fantasy. I appreciate creating masks, and that's something I do in my teaching artist work as well. This is another performance. It was inspired from Greek mythology, and so it's this character traveling through their unconscious mind through this labyrinth. And so there's an ensemble of actors who are creating the setting in the space, and the characters meeting these different characters from Greek mythology. This is from a production that was in the New York Fringe, a play that I wrote that was an adaptation of Dostoevsky's novel Poor Folks. And it's an epistolary novel. So I was taking something that was told through letters and creating these scenes and characters and honoring Dostoevsky's voice and the themes that he's exploring in the work while using my own voice to tell the story and to adapt it to the stage format. And this is another history play, which was about Annie Diggs, who she was an activist in Kansas and part of the populist movement. So here are some of my masks, and this was from a residency with the Art Students League in upstate New York, in Sparkhill, New York. And I created masks based off specific sites in the residency. So personifying, so when we saw the nature around us as having a character or personified, how did that change how we interacted or viewed? So just creating these characters inspired from the nature around the residency. and the sculptures and artwork that was there. So, in the buildings. So here's some photographs from that. And this is a fashion collaboration I did with a colleague, Tamara Leacock, who creates fashion designs using repurposed material. There's a lot of waste in fast fashion, and so she only uses repurposed material in her designs. So I created some masks to go with her fashion. And again, this is another collaboration with Tamara using her fashion. This is a collaboration I did with a dance company in New York, and it was inspired from German expressionist film, and it was a production of Alice in Wonderland. And so it was in black and white in 1920s and German expressionists. And so these are some of the masks that I created for that. At the beginning of the piece, there was a chess game happening where the dancers were on stage, sitting on chairs, doing a dance piece with the chairs as though they were these different chess pieces playing a game of chess. So that's what the audience experienced when they came into the show. And this is from the Puppets and Poets Lab at the Bushwick Star. And it's this collaboration where you come in and you meet different poets and you create a piece. So I created puppets and directed or devised this piece with an ensemble of performers. And I created these book pieces that were puppets. I created a pop-up book and these different book pieces. And I also incorporated shadow puppetry. And it was exploring an Emily Dickinson poem about the nature of solitude. So it was different parts of this person's consciousness sort of coming together and exploring the poem collectively. And these are the nativity puppets at Trinity Church, Wall Street, that my sister Cecilia Roberts and I built. And some of them are up to 16 feet high, depending on who's wearing them. And they're backpack puppets. So they're built on top of these wooden backpacks with PVC pipe. And they're a lot of fun. And here's some other photos of those puppets. And here's some other puppets. There was a Trinity Church did a water justice conference. And so we created these puppets that explored the theme of water justice. And so kind of a Lady Liberty and a Mother Earth puppet. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about my work as an educator in New York. This is a project I did in Brooklyn, and it was with middle school students. And we were exploring ideas around community, and they would do poetry pieces, writing that explored community, and they created these characters and these puppets and talked about what community meant to them. And they went on a parade around their community, and then it culminated in a performance with some singing that they created together. So this is a puppet from that, and they used, fabric and bamboo and cardboard. This is from a project that I was a part of in the Philippines. And the young people wrote pieces about if the island could talk, what would the island say? So just celebrating and appreciating where they live and thinking about the environment around them. And again, creating puppets from found materials and fabric. Here's another photo from that. Some bird puppets. And this is from a project I did through the New Alchemists, which is a theater company that I've been a part of. And we were in Hilo, Hawaii, and it was part of this Aloha Arts Festival. And it was a community puppet building workshop. And so it was Puppets for Peace. And so community members were invited to come in and make puppets. And then it culminated in a performance where we walked around the downtown. So these are some of the puppets from that. Here's some more photos. And this is something I have that's upcoming if any of you are interested. I'm doing an interactive shadow puppetry exhibition, and it's inspired from the poems of Emily Dickinson. During the pandemic, I became very attached to the birds and bird watching because I was home a lot. So the piece explores the nature of solitude, of becoming attached to the nature that's around you. And that'll be happening next week if any of you are interested in coming. And there's different shadow puppet theaters around the space. And I wanted to take some time as well to talk about different art teachers that have inspired me and my artwork. I had a really great theater teacher who ran the Kaleidoscope Theater growing up in my small town in Kansas. And he did these fun, large cast productions. And I was really shy growing up. And so it was a space for me to build community and to meet folks. And it really engendered a love of theater at a young age. So I really appreciated that. And there was also a program in my hometown at the public library, and they would do different art history art projects. So you would learn about a painting in the time period, and they would have tons of art supplies, and I got to use oil pastels, so fancy crayons. I was very excited about that. So, the types of programmings like that really meant a lot to me. And I still have remembered some of these art history lessons, like surrealism and these different movements that gave me an idea of different ways of creating work. So I'm very appreciative of the opportunities I've had from community theaters, from library programming, from school programming. So I want to thank you for listening to my talk. And I want to open it up to, any questions that you might have about, my creative work, my writing, my teaching practice. I'll go ahead and stop my share. So, if anyone has any questions or comments.
Ella, I'll go ahead with the question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm interested in your what influenced you, inspired you. You talked a little bit about growing up in small town Kansas and the library. But what was it? Can you identify anything with that family artist? I guess I'm sort of interested in the where the mask came from, and your puppets, the puppets and the mask. Did that all kind of start in Kansas also?
That's a great question. I think growing up, my mom she's a librarian, but she's also a wonderful stained glass artist. And so my mom was very artistic growing up, and my sister's a portrait painter. So we had a family that really valued the arts and really supported us in the arts. And I was really interested in theater too. Like I said, I had this great theater teacher, Antonio Munoz at the Kaleidoscope Theater, who really engendered a love of theater and community building and theater that was really open and fun. And so, growing up, I loved art and I loved theater. And during my undergraduate studies, it was really hard for me to choose between theater and art.
Okay.
And I think puppetry and mask making was a way for me to combine both of those. And something I really appreciate about theater as a medium, it's very different from film in that it can be very imaginative and playful, and there's things you can do on theater that you can't do in film. It can be, and so that's something I think that puppetry and mask making does really well, is that element of play and that element of imagination. And I also appreciate imagining, different worlds. And when you do a puppet parade, you're taking a public space where folks have this specific social contract, and you're reimagining that public space, or you're bringing something playful into that public space, and you're changing kind of the social norms and rules of that space. So I appreciate, doing work in spaces where folks aren't used to seeing performance or theater, that's, and they're taking a place that they know and they have associations with and reimagining it.
Okay, good. There's another question here for you. What does your creative process look like?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of research. So I do a lot of research before I get started. So for my Agatha Christie play which is my thesis play, I read, a bunch of books, and I read a bunch of plays from the 1920s and a bunch of, history. And I watched a bunch of Agatha Christie, and I just really immersed myself in the world of the play. And I just did a bunch of research. And for a play, they call it pantsters and plotters. And pantsters is like you write by the seat of your pants, whereas with a plotter, you meticulously plan things out. As I've become older, I've become more of a plotter because sometimes when you go back into the editing process, it saves you time to have sort of planned things out. And then you can also have other people look at it and give you feedback. So I will plan an outline. And also too, when you're doing a commission, like a puppetry commission, you want to have that budget, you want to have that timeline to folks. So I think really planning out, the timeline and is an important part of that creative process too, the practical side. But I think for me, just keeping myself inspired, reading, experiencing other works of art, seeing other works of art, having conversations with other creative folks is a big part of the process. Having a community is really important.
Okay, just another question from me, Lavinia. You mentioned that during the pandemic, you were somewhat isolated, and so birds came to mind, bird watching. So obviously you had windows, you were watching birds. Had you ever had experience with birds before? Was this something new for you?
I enjoy watching birds. I come from a family of birders. My parents were just in Nebraska seeing the crane migration.
Okay.
It's something in the pandemic, especially because I was home so much, I found myself becoming really attached to them, and they would come at certain times. And there's this Oriole that's out. So I was becoming, I had a newfound appreciation for them during the pandemic.
Okay. Yeah, it's easier to watch birds in southern Illinois than it is in Kansas and Nebraska. You don't see so many of them there. I'm a native Nebraskan. So
really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Here's another question for you, Lavinia. What advice would you give to artists just starting out?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say create work. I think it's a big part of being a creative is making work, and going to work, keeping yourself inspired, and thinking about what your goals are, writing goals for yourself, and trying to think, what's so great about being in school and formally studying art or formally studying theater is that you have so many opportunities to collaborate and create with other folks. And so finding spaces where you can collaborate and learn from them and what they do, and finding a community of people who support you and appreciate you and value what you do. But I like to set goals for myself. Like a goal I really wanted to set for myself was I like to do a solo show exhibition every year. And so this year I was like, I really want to do this Emily Dickinson shadow puppetry exposition. So I found a space that's a really great fit for it. I don't know if you've been in Gallery 3 or 4, but they have this great media space where you can really control the lighting that, in the space. So I found this perfect space for this piece. So I'd really be able to intentionally render it and do it how I really bring it to life in the way that I really wanted to. So yeah, finding those different opportunities to exhibit your work and get feedback. And as a writer, you have your unconscious writer brain, and then you have your editor brain. And so your unconscious brain is just getting ideas, but your editor brain is coming back and refining it. And so keeping both inspired, filling your unconscious mind with creative work, but then also collecting those tools as an editor of ways that you can strengthen your work. And that can come through reading books about writing, taking classes, taking workshops, talking to other writers, thinking critically, when you're reading a work, why is this effective? Like, what do I think is strong about this? What is working? What choices is this creative making? And knowing that not everyone is going to connect with your work in the same way. So when you do, especially in theater, when you find those actors and those directors who are just so excited to do your project and they understand the world, let those folks know how much you appreciate them and value them, and keep working with them. Like, build a community of folks to create work with that you have an artistic connection to.
Great advice. Could you identify any barriers that you've encountered as a woman? I guess let's just say it that way. As you tried your creativity out in various venues. Any barriers?
I'm thinking. Well, I did have a specific experience with someone who told me that women weren't funny. And so my response to that is every year I publish a 10-minute piece that's gauged towards middle school girls. That is a comedy, a solo show comedy, because I think that's the age where young girls get a lot of messaging that what's important about you is your appearance, and they feel all these social pressures, and they're seeing all these pressures on their social media, and they want to fit in and be part of the clique, and they might not want to stand out and be funny. So my response to that person is to just write funny plays for women and funny roles for women. And something that's important to me too is questioning gender stereotypes on stage in theater for young women, but also for young men as well. Because I've heard from young actors that the types of roles that they get cast in are these very traditional constructions of masculinity, and they're like, no, we want to be allies, we want to support and listen to women, and we want to be able to express a broad range of emotions. They say it's more acceptable for men to express anger and for women to express sadness. And so having plays where, folks, regardless of the way they identify their gender, can express a full range and body of emotions is important too. And I think that you can talk about issues and values and that are important to you while being entertaining as well. So my Agatha Christie play, it's a mystery and it's a comedy, and it has funny dialogue and big physical comedy and a fast moving plot, but it also has, women who are making active choices. It's really open to diverse casting, gender flexible casting. So that was something that I really wanted, was to, create these strong, active female protagonists on stage who are making choices. And I oftentimes will center relationships between sisters and women mentors, because so often the relationships that are seen as having the most value are romantic, these heteronormative women between men relationships. And so I wanted to show women supporting and loving each other as sisters. Like my Louisa May Alcott play is really kind of a sister love story. Agatha Christie, there's play. It's my main character and her, her friendships and mentors, relationships are really highlighted. So I think just creating the type of art that you would really want to act in, because I know when I was younger, I would get cast in these roles where I was often playing a mom or a girlfriend. So it was really centered around this male character. And I was like, I want a story where the woman is active and making choices, and it's not just about a romantic relationship. And that's the type of role, and women get to be funny on stage. So funny comedies for women. So that's the type of work that I'm invested in writing.
And going along with all of that is a question here came forward. It seems like artists could be working constantly. So how do you maintain a work-life balance?
That's a great question. And I know as a creative person, I really need work-life balance. I know there's some folks who but for me, I think sometimes having to set firm boundaries, and really curating your mental space is important too as a creative person. So for example, when I'm teaching or facilitating a class, I am present and I'm teaching and I'm actively listening fully to the folks in that space and their work. But then when I'm doing my work, I want to have that same level of attention. So when you leave work, really leave work. Really curate your mental space and be present in whatever you're doing. And sometimes you have to say no to things that you really want to do, but you just know that you don't have the bandwidth to be able to give them the attention that they deserve. And so it's okay to let folks know, oh, I'm not able to do that. And be okay with the fact that sometimes certain things will happen in your life and you won't be able to make work in the same ways. Maybe you're processing a loss. Maybe a big life change has happened, like, you're moving and you need to really focus on getting settled, or give your support to someone else that you care about. And so your focus is on that. So be okay with the fact that part of the writing process is the creating process, but sometimes another part of that process is just healing and taking a break. And just going to things that inspire you. I do a lot of walking. I find walking really helps me. So I like to go on walks and listen to podcasts or music or books on tape.
Yes.
And that's a way that I rejuvenate and do research for my art, keep myself inspired.
Excellent advice, definitely so. So here's another comment for Lavinia. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we, that being AAUW, could have you as a consultant to help us generate ideas for getting middle school students engaged in some form of public art for our program next year?
Okay, yeah, if I can help you with that.
Okay. Tell us how to go about that, being able to get teachers involved and so that we have some access to the students in the school. So that would be wonderful, and we'll always appreciate all of your ideas. Go ahead.
I worked through organizations who would kind of give me residencies in schools, but a lot of what I do is very collaborative. So I am working with classroom teachers. So for example, I did a project where the students were learning about climate in science class. And so they devised a play and the teacher created a puppet, and the puppet spoke in Spanish. And then I created a puppet and I spoke in English, and we traveled to these different climates and talked to the different animals. And then the students did that research, and they were really excited to do the research because they needed to know, okay, well, what would my tree frog, what makes my tree frog angry? What does my tree frog want to talk about? What does they love to do? And so it got them excited. So I think talking to classroom teachers is a great way to start. And then if you can incorporate something that the students are, because a big part for me is research, a big part of making art. And so if it's something they're already researching in school that they're learning about, it makes them excited to learn about it. And then they're doing that research. So then when you show up to devise the play or make the puppets, they are already bringing a lot of knowledge into the room.
Yeah.
You are indeed an inspiration, Lavinia. So, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to turn this back to Ella and to Martha.
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me.
It's been a delight.
Yes, it has absolutely been a delight, and we're so grateful, Lavinia. And thank you so much for all of your great ideas that we hopefully can carry forward for our programs. I'm supposed to say something about AAUW, but I think I'm mostly talking to AAUW members right now. But I just want to say this is just another wonderful example of our scholarship program and the marvelous applicants that we have that, and like, Lavinia is amazing. We have some that we got this year out of a 33 applications. We had to pick 3, and they were just each wonderful. So, and as I mentioned before, in our last at our Celebrate Women event, our keynote speaker, who's director of the PA program, told us about many of her former students who had gotten scholarships. I mean, it helps, but to see the fruit is just amazing. And so it's something that's real important for us, our scholarship program is. And thank you so very much. And yes, and I will certainly send out the information about the flight program that you have coming up. I'll send out to our membership because we want to keep supporting you. And besides, I think it'll be wonderful. Ella?
Well, thanks, Martha. Lavinia, that was wonderful. I don't have art talent that I've discovered yet, but creativity just gets me all fired up for sure. So it was so inspirational hearing you talk, and just thinking of students who just, if they could have heard you today, as a matter of fact, if we could have just had the space packed with them to kind of hear you for all the things you told us that you have done already and will continue to do for some time to come. I just think that would have been really great. So I do hope that we can continue. We understand you're a full-time student and engaged in many things, but I hope we can continue to keep you involved in helping us to build a better effort at what we're doing. So thank you so much. To close our program out for today, I had mentioned at the opening that this is our last program of this year, the 21-22 year. And our program starts up in the fall with an opening program in September. So we're basically going to give the public a break, but in AAUW, there are many things that we will be engaged in doing, finishing off this year and getting ready for next year. So we appreciate all the support that everyone has given us who are in our audience today and has been in any of our audiences this year. And we just want to say thank you once again. So with that, if no one has any other comment, and there may be something that I should have told the audience that I have failed to do, if so, just raise your hand. Okay, thank you so much, and good night. We will be seeing everyone again next fall, and perhaps it will be in person, perhaps it will be a mixed system. And if it has to be Zoom, we think we've had a wonderful time with our Zoom experiences, and we've learned a lot. So again, thank you and good night.